my favorite stories is called Enemy Pie. In this story, a boy has an obnoxious, awful enemy, and he wants to get rid of him. He doesn't know what to do, so he goes and asks his father for help. Fortunately, his dad has a secret recipe for a pie that will get rid of his enemy forever. Now, we may not have a simple recipe to get rid of our enemies, and we may not even have simple enemies. We may have complicated groups, ideas, mental health issues, problems. Our enemies may even be ourselves. But today I want to present to you a recipe that, if followed, can get rid of your enemies too. See, in order to get rid of our enemies, we have to face them and embrace them. First of all, it's important to know that a lot of people think that it's healthy to avoid our fears. However, science shows that when we avoid our fears, the stress response in our brain never calms down. We actually have to avoid the fear more and more and more until it turns into an anxiety. Facing our fear gives us power. Avoiding our fear makes us controlled by our fear. So, what's the recipe to creating enemy pie to get rid of our enemies? First, face our fears. Second, embrace our fears. First, face our fears. I've been a dancer my whole life, and one of the most important lessons I've learned is that the ground hurts. It hurts when you fall from a high leap or a high jump, and you find your face right next to the ground. Because I'm so scared of the ground, I've often found that my body tenses up, and I feel nauseous every time I look at the ground. My head tries to tuck in, and I bring my arms in small, because I'm scared of being unstable. However, this very action makes me more likely to fall. And when I do fall, it makes me more likely to get seriously injured. However, by simply embracing the ground and looking straight at it, facing my fear, and realizing that the ground can be there to help me rather than just hurt me, I've learned how to put pressure into my feet and extend through my arms so that I'm more able to balance beautifully, and I'm much more likely to be safe. See, facing my fear of the ground has actually allowed me to take advantage of my enemy. And now I feel much more comfortable and much more beautiful when I perform. Now, the second step to overcoming our enemies or our fears, the second part of the recipe, is to embrace our fears or our enemies. This last year, I've had the amazing opportunity to work with so many refugees who've had to deal with some of the most painful, fearful experiences that we could ever imagine. I remember one time in particular, I was looking at his collection of refugee stories, terrified to continue reading. See, I was scared that if I kept on reading, I would find out the world was hopeless. And I have a terrible fear of thinking the world is hopeless. There was a man standing next to me. His name was Leonard. He was a refugee himself. He had come from Africa to the US, and after resettling, he had decided to start a non-profit organization to help other refugees. I remember asking him, "Leonard, how do people read these stories and still have hope about the world?" I'll never forget his answer. He looked me straight in the eyes and told me, "I won't let my little kids read those stories. They're too young. I won't even let them listen to my story. I don't even like to listen to my own story." See, oftentimes when people try to read these stories, they can't go past the pain, the torture, the rape, and the injustice of the world. It's too much for them, so they stop listening. But then he told me, the people who keep listening and keep pushing through the pain find the hope in the stories. See, Leonard taught me an amazing lesson that day. He taught me that when we face our fears and embrace them, we actually start to hear the hope. Leonard did this by facing his own fears, by recognizing that he had a terrible story, but he embraced his fears and his enemy by sharing his story, because by sharing with other people, he learned that he could spread hope. As it turns out, the best way to get rid of your enemy is to face it and embrace it, or in other words, become friends with your enemy. At the end of the story, we find out the secret to the enemy pie is that it's simply a normal, healthy, delicious pie. The recipe is just like any other pie. However, this one turns big, huge enemies into big, giant friends. One psychology expert explained that when we face our fears, we have to reward ourselves because it can be difficult. However, you may find that when you face and embrace your fears, the natural reward is that you gain a lifetime healthy relationship with something you feared before. So, are you ready to make some pie and face our fears together? Because you might discover it tastes delicious.